Have you ever wondered why most cars come out in the fall instead of January? The answer is surprising, set against the backdrop of the Great Depression and FDR's New Deal. The birth of the model year is today's topic, here on Hubcap Club. When I chose this topic, I actually didn't know why automobile model years aren't aligned with the calendar. What I thought would be a quick and easy video turned out to be something much more complicated, spanning the roaring 20s, the depths of the Great Depression, all the way to today. Back in the 1950s and 60s, fall new car season was a major deal. Most new models were introduced in October and November. Starting in mid to late summer, car magazines would start speculating and leaking info about the upcoming model year. Some of the illustrations accompanying these articles were pretty accurate. Others, not so much. Similar pieces appeared in newspapers and general interest magazines. Here are just a few of the dozens of 1959 new car preview articles from the New York Times. Meanwhile, local dealers slashed prices on their in-stock inventory to clear the lot and make room for the new arrivals. Final closeout, final clearance, at dealer's cost. You name the price, just a few left. Come and get 'em. I love this 1955 TV commercial that leans into the mystery. It shows how Chevrolet kept the new 1956 cars under canvas wraps until they went on sale in November. My favorite shot is the dealer whitewashing the showroom window to hide the new cars from passersby. Yet you have to wonder, why not just leave the canvas covers on? Anyway, nobody I knew ever asked why new cars came out in the fall or why there needed to be something called a model year that differed from the good old tried and true calendar year. Here's how it all started. Ever since the early days of automobile manufacturing in America, cars have been identified by make and year, like a 1903 Packard or a 1908 Ford. That didn't necessarily mean that a 1905 Oldsmobile was different in any way from a 1904 model. It just indicated the year in which it was made. Improvements and new models were usually introduced whenever they were ready. But in the 1920s, Alfred P. Sloan, chairman of General Motors, came up with an ingenious idea to sell more cars. Taking a cue from the fashion industry, GM began to update the appearance of their cars on a yearly basis. The dawn of each new year meant new GM models in dealer showrooms. Of course, nobody called these model years because the yearly updates corresponded perfectly with the start of the calendar year. Annual updates made it easier to tell if a GM car was the newest version, and style-conscious or status-seeking drivers craved the attention they got from driving the latest and greatest. Thus began the age of planned obsolescence. Other car makers took notice of GM's success with this approach, and by the mid-1930s, over 70% of car makers were making yearly changes. This coincided perfectly with the National Car Show calendar, which started in early January with the biggest automobile show of the year. The 1935 New York International Auto Show opened to the public on January the 5th. The New York Times published a special section with page after page of photos, articles, and advertisements. Ford exhibited for the first time in years to show off their newest V8 models. GM unveiled its new all-steel turret top on selected Chevrolets, Pontiacs, and Oldsmobiles. Nash's 1935 message to buyers was, "All of a sudden, motoring is different." Yes, that's what the car companies wanted you to think, year after year. But the Creative Copywriting Award has to go to Pierce Arrow, boasting that the company enters 1935 with an even larger share of the fine car business than in 1929. This was technically true, but only because most of their luxury car competition went out of business after the Depression hit in 1929. 1929 was also Pierce Arrow's biggest year, selling nearly 10,000 cars. In 1935, they would manage to sell only around 900. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, a big change to the new car calendar was just days away. Auto sales were finally showing signs of recovery, and the government, car makers, and auto workers were all anxious to take measures that would regularize employment. But what exactly does regularized employment mean? Ever since the auto industry's creation, manufacturing had been incredibly volatile. Companies built new production capacity and hired new workers when sales were booming, then suddenly idled those factories and laid off workers when sales tanked. The January model year system made this much worse. Buyers held off purchasing cars in the late fall, knowing Detroit would unveil their latest and greatest just hours after the last touchdown was scored at the Rose Bowl. In the waning months of the year, prices were slashed. Workers were laid off in droves, and assembly lines were shut down to prepare for the new models. Being out of work as winter approached was devastating. Now, I'm no expert in labor economics, but I happen to live down the street from someone who is.
Working in auto manufacturing was a very fluctuating job. You had a lot of times when you had to work long, long hours, and then you had other times where you were laid off and didn't have any work or income. And so there was a lot of interest in jobs that had smoother, timing of work. They called it regularization of work or employment, so that, people could work steady rather than having these wild cycles of working 70 hours one week and laid off another week. Really disruptive to people's lives and disruptive to their budgets.
In the midst of the Great Depression, it was obviously in the best interest of both the industry and the government to smooth out the employment curve. Could moving the date when new cars were introduced help the auto industry, its workers, and the overall economy? Both industry and government seem to think so, as seen in the Just Among Ourselves column of the December 29, 1934 issue of Automotive Industries magazine. Possibilities for regularizing automotive employment suggested in the report the NACC made to the NRA more than a year ago included the concentration of new model announcements in the late summer or early fall. Releasing new cars in the fall promised increased end-of-year demand for new cars and more money in the pockets of auto workers for holiday spending. A fall launch also meant car makers would have plenty of time to build up inventory for spring selling season without instituting grueling overtime work schedules. But automakers were nervous about making the shift at the same time, fearing they would be accused of market collusion and run afoul of federal antitrust laws.
The federal government said, we're going to allow the auto industry to coordinate on having its model launch at a time when we think it'll be beneficial. And actually, they asked the auto industry to study this, and the industry agreed that it would be advantageous for everybody to do their launch together in the fall.
The result was Executive Order 6955, an amendment to the Code of Fair Competition for the Automobile Manufacturing Industry issued by President Franklin D. Roosevelt on January 31st, 1935. This order has several sections dealing with employment in the automobile industry, but the one I'm focusing on today is Section 3. The members of the industry are requested and authorized to enter into agreements with one another with respect to fall announcements of new models of passenger automobiles and the holding of automobile shows in the fall of the year as a means of facilitating regularization of employment in the industry. Fast forward to November 1935. The 1936 models made their debut at the 36th Annual New York International Auto Show, just 10 months after the previous show. As far as I know, this is the first time there were two New York International Auto Shows in the same calendar year. And what a show it was! Here's the special auto show supplement to the New York Times with its front page headline, "The 1936 Motor Cars Make an Early Debut." Other front page articles emphasize the optimistic mood of the industry, goal of recovery now within reach, and motor executives ready to go ahead. And after playing nice and displaying at the January show, Henry Ford returned to his old rebellious habits. Ford boycotted the official November show and held his own separate competing exhibition at the Hotel Astor. A welcome feature this year on many models was a commodious trunk that could accommodate cargo or, in a pinch, passengers. Of course, the absolute star of the show was the new front-wheel drive Cord 810 with its distinctive coffin nose styling. Because these shiny new models were suddenly sitting in showrooms in late November, the industry aggressively pivoted to marketing automobiles as the ultimate family Christmas present. So, did moving car introductions to the fall actually help the car business and the economy? It definitely helped in the short term. Thanks to the calendar shift, the fourth quarter of 1935 was the biggest in automotive history up to that point. But did it make a lasting positive change? I managed to locate a scholarly paper published in 1993 that argues just that. Most of the econ speak in this document is way above my comprehension level, but it states in plain language that what was conceived as a temporary measure actually succeeded in permanently altering the seasonal pattern of production and sales in the automobile industry. Over 90 years later, the tradition of releasing new vehicles in autumn remains. It's not the strict rule it used to be, as many vehicles are released throughout the year. In the US today, EPA regulations actually allow a 2027 car to be legally released as early as January 2nd, 2026. And now you know why new cars come out in the fall. Thanks to Aaron Sojourner for appearing in this video. Aaron is senior economist at the Upjohn Institute for Employment Research and former senior economist for labor at the U.S. President's Council of Economic Advisors. Plus, he's a really great guy. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. I read them all, and often I learn something new. And as always, I appreciate your suggestions for future topics. For Hubcap Club, I'm Rob.